Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Ignatius Press interview with Paul Senz, the author of Fatima, 100 Questions and Answers about the Marian Apparitions. So Paul is the author of this new book from Ignatius Press. By the way, I'm Thomas Jacoby. I'm an editor at Ignatius Press in San Francisco. I'm here at the offices, fortunately. Glad I'm able to work from here. So Paul is a frequent contributor to periodicals like Catholic World Report, the National Catholic Register, Catholic Herald, Our Sunday Visitor News Weekly, Catholic Answers Magazine, as well as a Catholic News Service. He has an MA in Pastoral Ministry from the University of Portland, and he lives in Oregon with his wife and children. So welcome, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
So Paul, your book, it's exactly, I think, what the title says it is. It's a series of 100 questions and answers about the Marian apparitions at Fatima. And they range really from history, spirituality, to theology, even to canon law, which is kind of amazing that you're able to pull that off. And I'd say it's for skeptics and the devoted alike. You know, I think it's addressed to a very broad audience. So Dr. Edward Sri, who wrote the foreword, very good foreword to this book, he says that the book can also, it was sort of prompted, and partially at least, by the new feature film Fatima, which will be released through Picture House in theaters and on demand on August 28th, so in just a few weeks here. Yeah. And so my first question for you, it seems there's kind of a Fatima moment right now. So my question is very quickly, why Fatima? So what are some of the ways that the apparitions of the Blessed Mother at Fatima changed history? Why are we still talking about Fatima 100 years later?
It's an interesting thing that there have been all these Marian apparitions over the years, over the centuries, some of which have been vetted and deemed worthy of belief by the church, others of which have not even gotten to that point. But Fatima is one that certainly sticks in the sort of cultural memory. You know, it keeps coming back. You mentioned this film that's coming out. It's not the first film to be made about it. You know, there was a big Warner Brothers feature film in the 50s, I think, late 50s maybe. And there have been a number of them since then. It's just something that really has stuck around. And I think part of it is there are some really remarkable aspects of it that make it very appealing to a broad audience. Things like, we'll talk about this more in a little bit, I'm sure, but things like the three so-called secrets of Fatima, or the miracle of the sun, you know, where 70,000 people witnessed this incredible dancing of the sun in the sky, you know, things like that just really make it interesting and intriguing to people. So there's been increased devotion to Our Lady of Fatima down through the years, and it's really remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's amazing how widespread the devotion to Our Lady of Fatima is. You know, and I'm a convert, I'm a Catholic convert, and I was always there was kind of a question mark hanging over my head, like, you know, why? What is so remarkable about her? But I think your book makes it pretty clear. And so before we get there, though, let's go back to the very beginning. Can you set the stage for us? So the apparitions of Mary of Fatima, they came in 1917. Little Paul, can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, you're breaking up there for a second, but I think you're asking me about.
Sorry.
That's right.
I'll repeat my question.
Okay.
I'm plugged into the internet, but I'm not sure what's going on. So let's go back to the very beginning and just set the stage for us. The apparitions of Mary at Fatima came in 1917, little rural village in Portugal. What was going on in Portugal and Europe, or in the world at that time in 1917?
Yeah, so more broadly in the world, but focused in Europe, the First World War was going on. It was 3 years in. The war was raging. Society was, flipped upside down, and in Portugal, in particular, there was a good deal of upheaval as well. You had this nation that was traditionally, culturally very Catholic, to the point that the monarchs of Portugal traditionally did not wear crowns because Mary was the rightful sovereign over Portugal. So she was the sovereign. So they traditionally didn't even wear crowns. It was just embedded into the culture of the country. But then in 1908, there was a sort of a revolution where these anti-monarch, anti-Catholic, anti-clerical, this group came in, assassinated the king, and this new government formed, and it was Masons that took over. And so, and then in 1911 they passed a law of a separation of church and state law, and things like clerics were not allowed to wear clerical garb in public, and there were just all these measures against the church. So even culturally there was this upheaval in the country, and in the big cities there was a lot more secularization going on. But you did have in little places like Fatima, these rural areas, the faith was able to continue. People will continue to be very devout, although they feared, government retribution and government encroachment on their liberties. So it was a tense and dramatic moment in the world and in Europe and in Portugal.
Mm.
So Thomas, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you don't mind, I'll move on. I'll talk a little bit about the visionaries, these children that Mary appeared to.
You just said that the little villages like Fatima, and what was?
So yeah, like we got some technical difficulties. It looks like. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the visionaries. In Fatima, there were these little hamlets, little groups of homes. In one of them, there were these 3 children, among others. There was Lucia Santos and 2 of her cousins, brother and sister, Francisco and Jacinta Marto. They were shepherds. They were very close. Lucia was the oldest, and then Francisco, and then Jacinta, just separated by a few years. Jacinta was about 7. Lucia was about 11. And they were kind of typical children in this town. They were shepherds. They could be emotional. Lucia was very mature for her age, very wise for her age, and she was very popular among the other children in the town. And there was something about them that drew people to them, and for reasons unknown to us, they were chosen as the recipients of these apparitions, these visits from Our Lady.
Paul, can you hear me now? I just want to confirm that you can hear me. Okay.
You're much clearer now.
I jumped in and jumped back. Jumped out and jumped back in. I should have imagined that something like this would happen. Well, Paul, couldn't these kids have all been just making it up, just making the whole thing up? Yeah.
A lot of people thought that at the time. Actually, almost everybody thought that at the time. Francisco and Jacinta's father believed them implicitly, immediately. But just about everybody else in their families and almost everybody else in the town at first thought that they were making it up. They thought they were doing it for attention or just to play a prank or something. But one of the interesting things is Francisco and Jacinta's father said they've never done anything like that before. Why would we expect that from them now? They've been these honest, good children up until now. Why would we not believe them? And one of the things that I think is that you have these people in this town were so devout that they had such an understanding of the transcendence of God and of these miraculous things, but to the point that they thought nothing like that could happen here. This is a regular old town. These are little shepherd children. Nothing like that could possibly happen here. So initially, there was, let's say, extreme skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so what was their first encounter then with the Lady of Fatima? What was it like?
So the first time, it was it was more mysterious than you might imagine. Even they were out with their sheep, and this lady appeared to them on top of a holm oak tree. And this first part was kind of almost a script that they followed through each of the successive appearances, where this lady appeared, and Lucia. Actually, it's interesting. Francisco could see the lady but could not hear her. Jacinta could see her and hear her but could not speak to her, and Lucia could see her, hear her, and speak to her. So there's almost a hierarchy of communication there. So Lucia was the one who was communicating with her, and she asked who she was, and the lady said, "I come from heaven." That's all she said. She didn't identify herself beyond that. But she said, "I come from heaven." And when Lucia asked, "Okay, well, what do you want from us?" And she said, "I want you to pray the rosary every day, and I want you to come back here on the 13th of every month." So that was May 13th, 1917, the first time she appeared, whoever this lady was. And she said, "Come back here on the 13th of every month, pray the rosary every day, and make sacrifice, make reparation for sins." And they asked some questions of her. "Okay, you come from heaven, so can you are we going to go to heaven someday?" It was one of the things they asked her. And she told them, "Yes, you will go to heaven, but Lucia, you will have to wait a long time. Francisco and Jacinta will come soon, but Lucia, you will have to wait a long time. You'll have to do a lot of work on earth for us." And then she shortly thereafter disappeared.
You used a phrase when you were describing that. You said, "Whoever this lady was." Did these kids not know it was Mary? Did they think it was Mary?
They didn't know it was Mary. I think it's kind of unclear what they thought at first. I think that they maybe suspected it was possible, but she appeared to them very young. I believe, if memory serves, they said she looked like she was about 15. This young woman appearing to them, but they didn't know who she was for sure. So when they were talking amongst themselves, or even eventually telling people about it, they would refer to her as the lady, or the beautiful lady from heaven, something like that. Variations on that. And then as word started to spread around their families and around the town, more and more people thought that this is who it could be. They said, "Okay, who's a lady in heaven that we know who might appear to somebody? Well, maybe it's our Blessed Mother."
Everybody, just to remind you, we're talking to Paul Senz, author of Fatima, 100 Questions and Answers about the Marian Apparitions. And Paul, you just described kind of the innocent reaction of the kids to the visionaries of Mary, to the first apparition. They didn't assume it was Mary. They in their humility, they just assumed, it's just this beautiful lady from heaven. They knew she was from heaven because she told them, but they didn't jump to conclusions. And then word got around to the village. And my question is, how did the village initially react?
Yeah, the village. I would say the village as a whole. There was varied reactions. On the whole, I would say skepticism ruled, but there were those who were everything from intrigued to credulous, to people who just believed them. But they were pretty quickly people from the village, and then as word slowly seeped out, people from even further afield started showing up at their homes, saying, "This lady from heaven is appearing to you. Would you ask her this favor for me?" there's the communion of saints right there, right? would you please ask for this favor for me? My son is fighting in the war. Would you ask to keep him safe? Or my daughter can't walk. Would you please ask for her to be healed? Whatever it was, and so initially there was pretty severe skepticism, but it started kind of slowly but surely as the months went on. More and more people believed in.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that they were told to go back on the 13th of each month to go see this lady again.
Yeah.
And the lady, we know, at least I know now that I've read this book, I know that the lady appeared to them every time, just as she said, at least when they were able to go, when they weren't prevented. Yeah. When they would go, what sort of things would they see and hear typically when they would go see the lady on the 13th of each month? Was it something different each time? Was it always basically the same?
Well, there were certain things that were kind of standard. I think I mentioned that each apparition would open up in sort of a typical way, where she would appear, and Lucy would say, what do you want us to do, or what do you want from us, something to that effect. And she would say, I want you to come back on the 13th of every month, and I want you to pray the rosary. And then sometimes she would add something like, pray to Our Lady of Peace, that the war will come to an end. Or she started emphasizing sacrifices and offering up your sufferings for reparation for sins. And then in particular, July, so the third apparition in July and the last one in October had pretty profound differences. July was these visions that were given to the children that later came to be known as those three secrets of Fatima. And then October was the miracle of the sun.
Well, so as time went on, I assume bigger and bigger crowds began to come to these apparitions, began to come to these events, and word just spread farther and farther, as you mentioned earlier. It began in the village, but then it reached the larger countryside, and then really the whole nation through the newspapers. How did these crowds act at the apparitions? Why were they there?
Again, same with the village. There was a wide variety of people there, and a different sort of reactions and attitudes. As the crowds grew bigger, I mean, I think by July there were 4,000 people who joined them at the apparition site, and by October there were 70,000. I mean, these crowds were just exploding. As the crowds grew bigger, there was kind of almost camps forming, I would say. You had some people who were there because they believed and they were hoping to see something themselves or just be a part of it. There were people there who were skeptical but thought it was possible and wanted to see if there was anything there that could verify one way or the other for them. And then there were people there who went strictly to mock them. There were people who went with the express purpose of ridiculing the children or getting the others in the crowd to see the error of their ways and stop believing these silly children and just move on with their lives. And even later on, there were government officials. This Masonic government who was hoping that this thing would fall apart, and these religious fanatics would see the error of their ways and even turn against the children. You've got these huge groups at the apparition site. So there were some pretty disparate passions present.
Yeah, and I see that we actually have a question from a viewer or a listener. I think we'll get to it later on. We're going to talk more about your own personal investment in this book, the process of writing it. I'll respond to Quinn shortly. But you were talking about just now about the government authorities and their sort of hostile reaction. Mm-hmm. Can you give an example, a particular example of how this manifested itself?
Yeah, I would say the clearest example would be, 103 years ago, this week, in the August, the anticipated August apparition for August 13th, the local government officials who were receiving a lot of pressure from the national, federal officials there to kind of quash this religious disturbance that was cropping up in Fatima. They actually, under the guise of giving the children a ride from their homes to the apparition site, essentially kidnapped them and took them to the government seat town, miles away, held them there for, I think it was 2 nights, and they interrogated the children, threatened them. My understanding is that they didn't actually intend to kill the children, but they thought, these are young kids, we can scare them into admitting that this is all a hoax, because of course these anti-Catholic, atheistic, Masonic government officials are certain that it's a hoax.
Right, they're sure.
It's causing problems. So they say, okay, we're going to tell these children that if they don't admit it's a hoax, we'll boil them in oil till they're dead.
Oh my goodness.
And the children, they were terrified, but they didn't recant. They said, what can we do? And they kind of kept each other strong. And they, as a matter of fact, one of the nights they were held in prison with some, pretty dangerous offenders, but they're these young, sweet children. And there are stories about how that night the prisoners were consoling the children, and they were dancing with them and singing songs with them. And even when the children got down to pray the rosary, a lot of the prisoners joined them.
Wow.
So even their kidnapping and imprisonment had this profoundly positive effect on these criminals.
Wow.
These men.
Even the prisoners knew what the government officials didn't. So
right.
They knew these kids.
Yeah.
I want to pass, Paul, to maybe the most controversial aspect of the Fatima apparitions. That would be the 3 secrets. So this is the term we Catholics hear fairly often, even today, and usually it's regarding in the context of some sort of controversy regarding these 3 secrets. But it's usually unclear what these secrets even were. So, Paul, what were they prophecies? Were they visions of the future? Were they just these hidden facts that Mary revealed about reality? What were these secrets?
Well, it's sort of a combination of all those things. So the first 2 don't get as much attention. So, but I'll kind of mention those. The first vision, the first secret, was a vision the children received of hell. It was when you picture a stereotypical vision of hell, how it would be depicted in movies or in, Paradise Lost or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the children saw. There was, this lake of fire and demons torturing souls and these tortured souls being flung around by smoke and flames and screams of agony. And they were horrified. It was a vision they were seeing, but people who were in the crowd at the time reported, they couldn't see what was happening, but they could see the reaction that it was eliciting in the children. And the point of that, these children didn't need to be scared straight. They had already been assured that they were going to heaven, but they were shown this vision so that they would know what would happen if the world didn't change its ways, basically. And so Our Lady imploring them to say, I'm showing you so that you can tell the world, and so that you can ask them, ask the world to change its heart, to seek God and to seek truth and goodness, Well,
what about the second secret?
The second secret was a little less dramatic, but it was Our Lady talked about. She talked a little bit about that was more almost prophetic, I would say. Yeah, she was talking about the war and how the war would end soon, but that if the world did not change its ways, an even worse war consuming the world would come before too long. And she even referred to that it would come during the pontificate of Pius XI, which is interesting because there was no such pope as Pius XI at the time. Benedict XV was the pope. He would be followed several years later by Pius XI, but at the time nobody had ever heard of such a pope. And yeah, so the second secret was more of that, more of a giving context and a warning.
Huh.
And then
And how about this? How about the famous third secret?
the third secret, unlike the first two, the third secret was a vision without Our Lady's, commentary and narration. It was just a vision where the symbols were speaking for themselves. The children saw this vision of a steep mountain being ascended by a bishop in white, who they discerned was probably the Pope, along with other bishops and priests, clergy, and other people. And they're ascending this mountain that has a large cross at the top. And when they get near the top of the mountain, they're walking through a destroyed town with, just devastation everywhere, dead bodies. And as they're going through, they're praying for the souls of these people who have died. Then the group is attacked by a group of soldiers who kill this bishop in white. And and the children would eventually Lucia, I should say, eventually determined that this was prophetic, and she saw a kind of a fulfillment of this prophecy in the assassination attempt on John Paul II. And even while John Paul II was in the hospital recovering from that assassination attempt, he asked to have this still secret, third secret, that had been sealed in an envelope, brought to him so he could read it. And he apparently saw himself in that vision as well, because he decided to not reveal it publicly yet, but almost 20 years later, he did, and it's pretty broadly accepted that the vision was prophetic. And I should mention, the assassination attempt took place on May 13th, which was the anniversary of the first apparition.
Amazing.
And he always saw that as important. He even credits Our Lady of Fatima with physically intervening and adjusting the path of the bullet so that it wouldn't kill him.
Yeah. Well, another extremely fascinating aspect of the Fatima apparitions is the miracle of the sun. Now, can you just briefly describe the miracle of the sun? What happened? How many people were there? What did they see?
So this would be at the final apparition on October 13th. In July, at the same apparition where the three secrets were given to the children, they asked for the lady to tell them who she was and to give some sign to the people so that everyone would believe them. And she said, "I will do both those things in October. The last time I appear to you, I'll tell you who I am, and I will give you a sign." And by this time, as I said, word had spread far and wide. There were somewhere around 70,000 people there in this field, on this farmlands, grazing land for the sheep. And it had been raining all night and all morning. Everything was soaked with sopping mud. Everybody was drenched. And this miracle of the sun, so-called, is given to the people, where at the end of this apparition, after Lucia's conversation with Our Lady, she kind of pointed to the sun, indicated the sun, and there are various reports from different people about some different things that happened to the sun. People say that it started visibly revolving rapidly, just spinning very rapidly, that it was changing color, and that even the light that it was casting on the ground, everything was changing color. But the main thing that basically everybody agrees upon and reports is that it seemed to kind of zigzag around in the sky, dance around in the sky. And I mean, I think we're talking like 10 minutes. And then it appeared to fall from the sky, come crashing towards the earth. These people were screaming. They were loudly confessing their sins in the hopes of some kind of absolution, because they were sure that it was the end. If someone's crashing to the earth, everything's going to end. And then it was over. The sun, of course, did not crash to the earth, but everything was bone dry. It's one of those kind of little quirks about it. It had been raining all night. Everything was soaking wet, but all of a sudden everything was dry. And then this crowd was full of, there were government officials, there were atheist newspaper reporters, there were skeptics, there were critics, there were believers. Everybody was that you can imagine was in this crowd, but they all reported the same thing. I mean, these secular newspapers had stories talking about the way that the sun behaved, this strange way that the sun behaved during this apparition, and they said they couldn't explain it, but that's what happened. And one of the remarkable things about it that I hadn't realized until I was researching and writing this book is that there are also reports from people 25, 30 miles away who are not even at the site who reported seeing something like that. And I think that's interesting because I read a description of the miracle that it was not a physical miracle that was performed. In other words, the sun did not actually physically move around like that. It didn't affect the rest of the solar system. People all over the world didn't see that. The heat that would have been generated from the sun actually coming that close to the earth, but that it was a miracle manifested for those individuals, but including some of these folks further afield, like I said, 25, 30 miles away. I read one report that was a British officer on a ship off the coast who wrote a letter to his family reporting that he had seen something like this.
Incredible.
And I mean, it's just incredible when you have such wide agreement, especially across the spectrum of belief, that I mean, there's no way it was a hoax or a mass hallucination or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's so much that's amazing about these apparitions, and there's so much that just speaks to its historical veracity. It's rather incredible. And but I'd like to pass to your own involvement and with these apparitions in a certain sense. The writing of this book, and actually, one of our viewers, Quinn Cohen, posed a really good question, which is, what about the apparitions at Fatima have you, Paul, personally experienced to be the most moving?
Yeah, ever since I was a kid, I was interested in Fatima. I had this little book that I read it to my kids once in a while now. I still have it. That was on the Fatima apparitions, but I didn't really fully grasp it, until I was writing this book, and especially learning it so young, it was almost like white noise. I heard it so much. I was so familiar with it that the details got lost, and some of the incredible aspects of it just kind of were lost on me until I was digging into it again for this book. And one of the things that really struck me the most was actually not from the 6 apparitions of Our Lady, but from more of the surrounding context. Several months before Our Lady first appeared to the children, an angel appeared to them a few times, and he called himself the Angel of Peace and the Angel of Portugal. And during one of these appearances, he appeared holding a host, and there was a chalice, and blood was dripping from the host down into the chalice. Lucia had received her first communion at that point, even though she had received it young, because the priest was so impressed by her knowledge and her faith that she was approved to receive it younger than everybody else. But Francisco and Jacinta had not received their first communion yet. But this angel, he left the host and chalice kind of stayed suspended in the air, and he knelt down with the children and adored the Blessed Sacrament that he had brought with him. And he then gave Lucia the host, and Francisco and Jacinta received from the chalice. So their first communion, Francisco and Jacinta's first communion, was from an angel who brought the Blessed Sacrament with him, and it's with that in mind, looking at the fact that Francisco and Jacinta, I think I mentioned that Our Lady said they were going to go to heaven fairly soon, and in 1919, just a few months apart, Francisco and Jacinta both died from the Spanish flu.
Oh, man.
After suffering with it for months and months and months. But before he died, Francisco was able to receive his first communion, temporally, physically. But Jacinta, she had this remarkable experience with the Angel of Portugal. But then the day that she was going to die, she received absolution from the priest and I think anointing of the sick. And she asked to receive the Eucharist as viaticum. And he said, yes, but don't worry, I'll bring it back in the morning. And she said, please, I'm going to die tonight. Can you please give me viaticum? He said, it's fine, don't worry, you're not going to die, I'll bring it in the morning. And she died that night. So she never even received
wow,
a physical host from the priest. Never received her first communion in that sense. But I like to think that knowing that would be the case, she was blessed with this reception ahead of time.
That's beautiful.
And she was warned. She was visited by Our Lady several times when she was in the hospital, and Our Lady told her that you're going to die tonight, and you're gonna come home. You're gonna be with me and our Lord. And she was able to have that consolation.
That's beautiful. And Paul, this book, Fatima, 100 questions and answers about the Marian Apparitions. Clearly, this book is meant to teach the ignorant, like me, about these strange and beautiful apparitions, which you've described so wonderfully here in this interview. But Paul, do you think that people who already know a good deal about Fatima, like probably a lot of Catholics, not me, but a lot of Catholics, do you think they can benefit from it as well?
I think so. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about Fatima, but then in writing the book, I learned a lot, especially context-wise. Maybe I knew about that there were 6 appearances, 6 apparitions. I knew about the secrets a little bit. I knew about the miracle of the sun, but I didn't understand what was going on in Portugal at the time. That really it helps to emphasize the message Our Lady was trying to communicate. This message of hope and the message that we need to make reparation for our sins, and that God wants devotion to her Immaculate Heart so that the world can change its ways. There were these demonic forces in the world, communism, these Masonic governments, Nazism was soon to come roaring forward, not to mention so many other horrors throughout the 20th century. And knowing all of that helps to really hammer it home the message she was trying to send. Yes. So yeah, I think that there's a lot that anybody could learn from this book.
Well, I agree, and it was really one of the really remarkable things about this book, which again I'll say again is Fatima: 100 Questions and Answers about the Marian Apparitions. Is it has simultaneously great depth and great simplicity. I mean, it's easy to read. It's I would say that it's written for it. It's not academic, but yet very much imbued with deep research. I think you're really reaching a broad audience, and I really encourage all our viewers to buy a copy. Now, before we leave, finish this great interview, do you think this book might be useful for group studies, families, for the classroom?
I think so, especially because of the question and answer format. It's my hope was to try to make it very approachable, these little bite-sized little nuggets. And also, I mean, if there are people who want to only do a study on the apparitions and not focus too much on the context, or people who are really more interested in just the 3 secrets or curious about that, they can just focus on that for a group study, or if there's a family who wants to focus on how these children, these visionaries, can be examples for children today to live holy lives in the face of so much opposition to the faith. Then they could focus on that, So that's kind of my hope, is that the question and answer format will allow people to navigate it however it would be helpful for them.
That's great. And Paul, can you tell us where our viewers can buy this book?
Yeah, I would say go to ignatius.com. And there are even, speaking of group studies and things, there are even bulk pricing available. You know, there are several discounts as you go up in quantity. So I'd recommend that too if anybody wants to do group studies or anything like that.
Excellent. And Paul, are there any last remarks you'd like to make before we say goodbye?
Just, I would recommend reading the book and praying the rosary. You know, Our Lady is here for us. She wants to take care of us. She wants to lead us to her Son. So have at it.
Excellent. Well, Paul, it's been such a pleasure talking with you as always. And thank you so much for writing this book, Fatima, 100 Questions and Answers about the Marian Apparitions, with a foreword by Dr. Edward Sri. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, for listening to this technically challenged interview at the beginning. I'm glad we were able to resolve that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please join us next week for another interview. Bye.
Thank you.